Joining us now, Denise Davy. She is senior reporter at the Hamilton Spectator and a recipient of the Michener Deakin Fellowship. Nice to have you here in TVO.
Thanks, Steve.
Let's start with just a bit of the brief background. The Michener Deakin Fellowship is obviously something you won, which enabled you to do what?
It allowed me 4 months to research the issue of children's mental health issues, which, you know, today's newsroom constraints and budget cuts, I would not have been allowed to. So it was just a huge opportunity to travel across the country. I went to British Columbia, Halifax, Saskatchewan, Ottawa, talked to different experts in the field and talk about children's mental health, see what's going on in the rest of the country.
Was that a condition of the fellowship, or you could choose whatever you want?
I could choose whatever I wanted.
So why'd you pick that one?
Well, I started about 2 years ago looking into the issue of children's mental health. And actually, just to back up to about 20 years ago, I think in the last 20 years I've been writing on and off about children's mental health issues. And whenever I finished the interview, it was usually somebody at the end of the phone would say to me, you know, you should really take a closer look at this issue. It is a huge problem. It's underreported, it's underfunded. And I'd say, well, you know what? I've got a busy beat and I've got a lot of time constraints. I'll try to get around to it at some point. And about 2 years ago, I pitched the idea to an editor and got some time. So I did a local look at the crisis in sort of the Hamilton-Burlington area. And I was absolutely shocked, absolutely shocked. It was appalling. I wrote a news story that said, if you have a problem or you're a parent or a professional or an expert in this area, please give me a call. My phone rang off the hook. My emails were so overloaded that my system actually shut down. I was truly astonished because after 20 years of writing about every social issue you can think of, because that's how long I was on the beat, I'd never actually crossed an issue that was so underreported and such a huge problem.
Well, particularly because I think the number that jumps out from your series is the 1 in 5.
Right.
1 in 5 children
It's
suffers from some kind of mental health problem?
And Dr. Dan Offord from Hamilton, of course, did the first study on that in '88. And in fact, I'd even reported on that study in '88. And I remember at the time thinking, this seems awfully high. But I did my 15-inch news story as was required, and life went on. And when I really, truly started to look at it, and I realized, you know, how extensive the problem was, and also what these families were dealing with. I mean, like literally, like mothers phoning me up, crying and sobbing into the phone. They'd had to quit their jobs because the services were not there at the schools.
But make a list. What kinds of things are we talking about here?
It's everything from ADHD to autism to a lot more kids being diagnosed with bipolar disorder these days, schizophrenia, but also the most common are anxiety and depression. And those are very overlooked and they're very underreported, and they're sort of like, you know, Johnny seems to have a worry problem, but I think he's okay.
Now you say underreported, but of course the sense we get today is that there is way too much overreporting of children's mental health issues that may not in fact be mental health issues. You've had a look at this. What's your conclusion?
Well, it's not, I'm not sure the experts would agree with that, because I mean, they're saying that it's not that the numbers so much are going up, it's just that they're recognizing it more and the doctors know what to look for, that sort of thing. And I think what's most important is that, especially with anxiety and depression, if you catch these illnesses or even health problems early, it's amazing how easily you can turn them around. And I looked at these anxiety prevention, depression prevention programs that they're offering at BC, and there's actually a couple in Hamilton. And you can really turn these programs or these problems around with these kids so easily.
So if you don't treat mental illness in children when you recognize it early, what happens?
Well, that's a very, I'll tell you, I'll point you to the Nova Scotia did something called the Nunn Commission a couple years ago, and it followed the case of a boy who had escaped from a Windsor facility and been let out and made his way back to Halifax and stole a car and ran a red light and killed a woman. And that all led them to say, you know what, it's time to take a look at this. And they traced, it was a fascinating report. They traced his life back to when he was born, and he had a simple case of ADHD, and sort of no supports in the schools, not a very stable home life. The family tended to move around a lot and that sort of thing. And it escalated to the point where I think he was 12, 13 years old. He started dropping out of school. He had nowhere to go, started hanging out in the streets, got into crime. And that's what happens. It can easily escalate out of control like that.
And this is obviously not a bad seed. This is a kid with mental health issues.
Absolutely. And if they got them early, as they say, and there's also the issue of brain development in 0 to 6 years, which so many people like Dan Offord, Dr. Fraser Mustard, they've all studied this and they know You know, when the baby's born, those neuron pathways are not connected. And if you get the right stimulation and the right sort of, like as I said, programs in place, you can get that child on the right path.
You know, if you break your leg, there is pretty much a guarantee that you're going to get treatment in the healthcare system.
Right.
If you got some, you know, if
Yeah.
you're not firing on all cylinders, as it were, there's really no guarantee of treatment in the same way, is there?
There really isn't, and a
Why
lot
isn't
of that.
Why don't we recognize
Well,
that?
I'll tell you, I mean, it seems to go back to the old Victorian mentality around mental illness. It's like, pull up your socks, you know, for heaven's sakes, you're just depressed, just get out of bed, you know, you're a weakling. All those sort of attitudes are just out there about that. And then there's a huge denial around children and mental health, especially people who say a 6-year-old can't be depressed. How can, you know, and it's just a little worrying problem, it's not anxiety. There's a huge denial around that. There's what they call the shame and blame factor too when it's children, because when there's sort of the shame issue with mental illness overall, but when it's children, parents are ashamed to come out and say, you know, my child has Asperger's or, you know, autism even, and that sort of thing.
What parent would want to acknowledge that they have a child who's depressed,
Well,
as opposed to just having a bad day?
Exactly, and because they're made to feel like they're to blame for it, while, you know, there may be absolutely no genetic component, or there may be. Sometimes, actually, I did find quite a few parents who've realized that they had ADHD or anxiety after their child was diagnosed. But
well, you know, obviously we're spending billions on healthcare in Ontario today, but if you were going to fund these services to the extent that they, you know, you believe the experts believe ought to be funded,
Right.
how much money are we talking?
oh, I mean, I don't think anybody could put a dollar on it because it's been so severely underfunded for so long. For more than a decade, children's mental health services were frozen. The funding was frozen. And as the experts say, point to any other area, you know, heart health, cancer, orthopedic surgery, where, you know, funding was frozen in that area. Like many people made that comparison between physical health and mental health. In fact, Dr. Pat McGrath in Halifax said that this is what it looks like. You go to the doctor and he says, look, you've got a brain tumor, and if we operated now, there's 80 to 90% sense of success. But you know what? We're not going to do that. You come back in maybe 4, 5, 6 years when your entire life is deteriorated, you're so sick you can't get out of bed, then maybe we'll look at it at that point. We'll see, you know, maybe 20% success rate. And he said that's what we do in mental health every day, and it's absolutely intolerable.
Would the treatment for children be different than the treatment for adults?
Very much so.
So this treatment for psychological difficulties?
And I think one of the most important statistics I came across was that 70% of adult mental illness has its onset in children and youth, which is astounding. To me, if you know nothing else about children's mental health, that's all you need to know. Because, I mean, think of the problems that you could, you know, the cure, you know, that you could eliminate.
How do they know that? How do they know 70% of adult problems start as children?
You'd have to ask the experts.
But that's what they believe?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that was quoted by the top experts at CAMH and.
The reason I ask about the approach to adults versus children is that they're obviously, you know, we hear all the time, and this is anecdotal, I don't know if there's any firm studies on it. A lot of people believe we're already over-medicating our children, and you don't know if medication is the solution to dealing with some of these psychological problems. Yeah. Should we be medicating our kids even more?
Well, that's a really good question, because there is that whole issue of what's happening now without the services is that the parents are often going to the family doctor, who then says, well, you know what, there's a 1.5 year wait to get you into child psychiatrist, and the parent says, I can't stand it anymore, and the doctor says, well, let's try some Ritalin or some other medication. They don't receive a lot of pediatric mental health training as family doctors. A lot of times they're prescribing the wrong medication. And then what the experts would tell you is medication should never be handed out unless it's either done in conjunction with talk therapy or afterwards. There's some sort of counseling program that involves either the child and the worker or the clinician or the whole family.
You told a story in one of your pieces in your series, and you're going to help me with the age because I can't remember. A young girl, her parents are asleep. They wake up and they see this young girl standing beside their bed with a knife in her hand. She was
6 years old.
She was 6,
yeah.
Poised to do damage to them.
Yeah.
What was going on there?
I tell you, Steve, and I can't tell you how many stories. I mean, people said to me, did that really happen? And I said, I could have written, like 20 parents told me the same story. She had been the victim of trauma, and that's actually another important point when you talk about what type of problems kids have. Trauma is a huge issue that's going unnoticed. And
well, was she sexually assaulted as a child?
She was as a child at 4 years old. Whether she had a predisposition to mental illness, they don't know. But she was eventually diagnosed as bipolar, and she's gone through different kinds of medication and everything else. But
do they know whether any of that might not have happened had the original assault not taken place?
They don't. It's interesting, though, that they had this exact same story as many parents I talked to, is when they started looking into, the parents started looking into their own backgrounds, mental illness backgrounds, and finding out that, you know, Uncle Johnny or Auntie Sue or had all these problems, mental health problems, that were never talked about. So that when they originally tried to get the diagnosis for the child, and the family doctor said, well, does it run in your family? And they said, no, neither of us have nothing, because nobody talked about it. So they went out and said, you know, Mom, is it in the family? In fact, one person told me about the story about the mother finally said, well, actually, your sister was schizophrenic. And she said, what are you talking about? She said, well, we never talked about it, because we didn't want Grandma to know. We didn't think she'd let you in the house if it was. So, I mean, the denial and the stigma and the silence around mental illness is so huge. And then, like I said, you can quadruple that for children's mental health.
You did tell us earlier that you crisscross the country, so I want you to do a bit of comparing and contrasting for us right now. Which province do you think has the best child mental health services?
I mean, you have to look at it from what angle you're looking at it, but certainly British Columbia in 2003 brought in the first province-wide child and youth mental health plan in the country. And some people said, you know what, maybe it was easier to do because we have a population of 4 million compared to Ontario's population. But they also had all, as one expert said to me, all the stars were aligned. They had Premier Gordon Campbell, whose father had suffered from depression, so he had personal experience with it. They
actually
had
goes further than that. His father killed himself.
Yes, he did it
when the Premier was 13.
That's right. That's right. So he had experienced this firsthand. Just various ministers who were in place that knew about the issue, and they had a person named Jane Barker, who was a real go-getter on this, and she just said, "We're going to get this plan in place." And within a very short time, they had a huge amount of funding. They doubled the number of clinicians in the entire province. They took money out of the crisis services, which is where Ontario is at, and put a lot into early intervention. And that was a huge step.
How does Ontario compare?
You know, that's one of the problems. The only really national body right now is the Mental Health Commission that's looking at this. And even they have not done sort of a province-to-province comparison.
Is this Michael Kirby's outfit?
That's right,
okay.
Yeah. Even they have not done like a dollar-for-dollar sort of comparison of the services.
Okay, but you said that they've increased the number of psychiatrists in British Columbia significantly,
Clinicians.
Right? Clinicians.
Yeah.
Do we have an adequate number of clinicians here in Ontario?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And the years and years and years of funding have eroded the staff count and eroded, you know, increased the wait times. So it's, no, we're very much in crisis mode in Ontario.
How much is the rate of mental illness in children determined by how we actually parent our children?
That's very controversial.
I'll bet it is.
What I can tell you, because nobody wants to blame these parents, what I can tell you is that a lot of the programs that I wrote about, including the one in Halifax, this family help phone counseling service, is that if you have to parent these children a little differently. Like one parent said to me, the normal type of parenting did not fit with my son, who had extreme ADHD. I had to rework it, and it wasn't just sort of intuitive parenting. I had to rework it to get my child, you know, the consistency and everything had to be a little bit different with them. But I mean, where you say sort of bad parenting, you can look at, you know, trauma and abuse. Family breakups are a huge trauma for children. And Gordon Floyd, Executive Director of Children's Mental Health Ontario, said to me, you know, it's so overlooked. I mean, it's so commonplace these days that we don't often think of the trauma it impacts on a child. So those sort of things that, I mean, let's face it, at the end of the day, we don't really value our children that well. And a lot of it is just we're not paying enough attention to them. And Dr. Jean Clinton, a child psychiatrist in Hamilton, said, you know, we've all got these crazy busy lives and we're expecting our kids to keep up with us.
And they can't.
No.
Or they're not.
No. It's, you know, and that may be creating a little bit of extra anxiety, depression with some of these kids. You know, they're overscheduled, they got too much homework, they've got two working parents, and that's not to blame the mother or the father, but, you know, we do live very busy lives.
I got a minute left, two quick last things. Number one, you got something going on tomorrow night?
We have a public forum at the Spectator at 44 Freud Street in Hamilton. Seating is limited, but we do have some seats available. If they call 526-3535, they can register for that.
Good
That's Deb Matthews, Minister of Children and Youth Services, going to be on our panel with Gordon Floyd.
Okay, and last thing is that 6-year-old. The 6-year-old who held the knife over the parents while they were sleeping. What's happened to her?
She's 15 now. She's in a residential facility for girls. The parents at one point last year had to give up custody of their daughter in order to get her into a facility because it was only for Crown Ward, so that was a problem. The family has been through absolute hell. The couple is staying strong and they're hanging in there. And Amanda is a lovely person, just a lovely person.
Is it a happy ending? You wouldn't want to go that far.
They don't know. They don't know. I mean, the mother, said to me, it's almost too late for our daughter. We love her, but we're just as worried about all the other kids that are out there, and there's a lot of them.
Denise, it's a very important and troubling series all at the same time. Thank you so much for doing it and for visiting us at TVO tonight.
Thanks, Steve.